What happens when the world's most important shortcut suddenly stops working? The Panama Canal is in trouble. Big trouble. You've seen the headlines. Cargo ships stuck in line, wait times stretching into days, and global trade feeling the shockwaves. The canal is drying up, and with it, so is the flow of over $270 billion worth of cargo each year. Now, as Panama scrambles to keep its canal alive, a global race is heating up. From Mexico's rail corridor to Nicaragua's mega canal dream, countries are racing to take the crown and reshape the future of trade as we know it. The $270 billion Panama Canal is dying, and no one's ready for what's coming. So buckle up, because this isn't just a story about droughts and delays. This is about power, money, and who controls the veins of the global economy. The Panama Canal, opened in 1914, wasn't just a marvel of engineering, it was a geopolitical game changer. Like a blade drawn through the dense jungle of Central America, the canal sliced across the Isthmus of Panama, linking the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans in a way that redefined trade routes. Before the canal, ships making the journey from New York to San Francisco had two choices. Brave the hurricane-prone waters of the Caribbean and then round the perilous Cape Horn at the southern tip of South America, a journey stretching more than 13,000 miles, mind you, or attempt the treacherous, often impassable ice-laden labyrinth of the Northwest Passage. Both options risked months at sea, massive financial loss, and hundreds of lives. The canal changed all that. What once took months now took days. A journey of more than 13,000 miles was reduced to just over 5,000. But this shortcut came at an enormous cost. Cutting through Panama was no small feat. It meant carving through the dense jungle, enduring sweltering heat, and battling a seemingly endless tide of mudslides, malaria, and yellow fever. Mountains had to be blasted apart, particularly the formidable Culebra Cut, once considered the most challenging excavation on Earth. A revolutionary lock system had to be designed from scratch to raise and lower ships nearly 30 meters above sea level across the artificial Gatun Lake and back down again. The human cost was staggering. More than 25,000 workers died over the course of the canal's construction, first under the French, then under the Americans. Disease, accidents, and grueling labor claimed their lives, often without ceremony. By the time it was completed, the United States had poured over $375 million into the canal, equivalent to more than $122 billion today. But what they gained was control over one of the most valuable choke points on the planet. For over a century, the Panama Canal was the beating heart of the global trade. It became the artery through which the lifeblood of the modern economy, oil, food, manufactured goods, flowed daily. At its height, more than 13,000 vessels passed through its gates each year, carrying over 300 million tons of cargo. It wasn't just a shortcut, it was a symbol of human ingenuity, resilience, and ambition. But now, over 100 years later, something has shifted. The world has changed. The climate has changed. And this historic artery of commerce, the same one that promised the future, is facing a crisis no engineer foresaw. And the question that now haunts the world is this: what happens when the shortcut that changed everything no longer works? Fast forward to 2025 and the Panama Canal is now staring down a crisis that threatens not just its own operations, but global trade at large, a crisis rooted in something deceptively simple: water. Or more accurately, the alarming lack of it. At the heart of the issue lies Gatun Lake, a vast man-made reservoir that serves as the canal's lifeblood. Since its creation over a century ago, the lake has been the silent workhorse behind one of humanity's greatest engineering marvels. It stores the fresh water needed to lift and lower ships through the canal's intricate lock system, about 50 million gallons of water per ship transit. But now, in an alarming twist of fate, that very lifeline is drying up. In 2025, Gatun Lake plunged to its lowest levels in nearly 6 decades, exposing muddy shorelines that haven't seen daylight in generations. The culprit? A combination of unrelenting heat, El Niño patterns, and above all, the unforgiving march of climate change. Once reliable tropical rains have grown unpredictable, turning lush rainforests into brittle, drought-stricken landscapes. What used to be a steady seasonal downpour has fractured into erratic bursts, too little, too late. With water reserves dwindling, the Panama Canal Authority has been forced to slash the number of ships passing through each day. Where once 38 vessels traversed the canal daily, that number has now dropped to just 24. And even those ships are facing severe restrictions. Larger vessels must shed thousands of tons of cargo just to remain buoyant enough to pass through, cutting into profits and raising costs across entire supply chains. The ripple effects are staggering. Shipping costs along certain routes have ballooned by over 400%, sending shockwaves through an already fragile global economy still trying to recover from pandemic-induced disruptions. Cargo that once flowed seamlessly between Asia and the Americas is now bottlenecked, rerouted, or delayed indefinitely. For manufacturers, retailers, and consumers alike, it becomes a slow-moving disaster with no easy workaround. And what's most unsettling is that this doesn't appear to be an isolated event, a freak dry season, or a once-in-a-century anomaly. According to climate scientists and water resource experts, this may well be the new normal. Without drastic intervention, either through water-saving innovations, large-scale infrastructure overhauls, or major shifts in global climate policy, the Panama Canal, once hailed as a marvel of reliability, could become a choke point of uncertainty. For the first time in its long history, the canal isn't just battling time and tide, it's battling extinction by evaporation. As Panama wrestles with paralyzing droughts, water shortages, and a shrinking canal capacity, a surprising contender is rising in the background, quietly, confidently, and with undeniable momentum. While the world's attention lingers on the Panama Canal's problems, Mexico is sprinting ahead with a bold counterpunch. Why wait for a solution in Panama when they can build their own shortcut? Mexico's solution, the staggering $7.8 billion interoceanic corridor of the Isthmus of Tehuantepec, is a 308-kilometer rail line stretching across the narrowest part of southern Mexico. On paper, it sounds deceptively simple. Cargo is unloaded from ships on the Atlantic side, shuttled across the land by train, and reloaded onto vessels on the Pacific side. No complex locks, no reliance on rain-fed lakes, no dependency on the weather. But beneath the surface, it's much more than a rail line, it's a geopolitical power move. Backed by billions in investment and tightly woven into Mexico's broader strategy to become a logistics powerhouse, the corridor is already partially operational, with full capacity expected to ramp up quickly. Warehouses, industrial zones, and smart logistics hubs are popping up like mushrooms along the route. Roads are being expanded, ports upgraded, and digital infrastructure embedded directly into the spine of this corridor. By 2033, estimates suggest it could handle up to 1.4 million containers annually, a number that, while not enough to dethrone the Panama Canal outright, begins to change the calculus for shippers caught in canal bottlenecks. And during Panama's current drought-induced gridlocks, Mexico's shortcut is proving to not only be faster, but cheaper. Even more intriguing, the corridor is just the beginning. Mexico is inviting foreign investors, particularly from Asia and Europe, to help transform the surrounding region into a next-gen trade and manufacturing zone. Some already calling it the Dry Canal, but in reality, it's a new kind of gateway, one designed for a world increasingly fraught with climate disruptions and global shipping instability. So, as Panama watches its once unshakable dominance falter, a question begins to emerge. Is Mexico quietly taking the lead in this global race for maritime logistics supremacy? Because if current trends continue, the answer might not be if, but when. But just when it looked like Mexico might dominate the transcontinental game, Colombia quietly pulled up a chair and placed its own ambitious card on the table. In a move that's both bold and symbolic, Colombia is reviving a decades-old vision, a 240-kilometer railway slicing through the dense jungles and mountainous terrain between the Atlantic port of Capurganá and the Pacific outpost of Acandi. On the surface, it's just a feasibility study, but beneath that bureaucratic label lies a sleeping giant. If completed, this rail line could offer a strategic alternative to the Panama Canal, diverting freight traffic and transforming Colombia into a pivotal player in global logistics. The implications are massive, not just for Colombian trade, but for the entire Western Hemisphere shipping routes. What gives this new push teeth is Bogota's broader, revitalized ambition. A sweeping national rail initiative aimed at restoring more than 1,800 kilometers of dormant railways across the country. The Capurganá-Acandi corridor wouldn't just be a one-off mega project, it would be the crown jewel of a new rail-based economic vision, reconnecting remote regions, spurring job growth, and tightening Colombia's hold on regional trade flows. But ambition alone won't lay down tracks. The project is already mired in thorny environmental reviews and fiery debates over land rights. Much of the proposed routes cuts through indigenous territories and fragile ecosystems, areas that just aren't protected by law, but fiercely defended by local communities. The specter of long-standing tensions between development and indigenous sovereignty hangs over the project like a storm cloud. And then there's the money. While the government has floated the idea of public-private partnerships and even hinted at foreign investors, the funding gap remains vast. The price tag isn't just in dollars, it's in political capital, social trust, and ecological risk. Still, Colombia's move is a signal to the world. The Panama Canal is no longer the only game in town. With climate change increasingly threatening the canal's reliability, alternatives are becoming more attractive by the day. So the question is no longer whether Colombia has a plan. It does. The real question is, can Colombia finish the race, or will this bold endeavor stall before it ever leaves the station? Because in the high-stakes battle to control the arteries of global trade, showing up to the conversation is just the beginning. Winning it? That takes a different type of power entirely. If there's one project in the modern age that reads less like infrastructure and more like the fever dream of a Bond villain, it's Nicaragua's mega canal, a monumental vision that aimed to not just rival but obliterate the legacy of the Panama Canal. At its peak ambition, this behemoth was projected to stretch an astonishing 278 kilometers across the heart of Nicaragua, from the Caribbean Sea to the Pacific Ocean, more than 3 times the length of the Panama Canal. The planned route would slice through Lake Nicaragua, Central America's largest freshwater lake, bringing with it the promise of supercharged trade, national pride, and billions in revenue. The canal's cost? A spine-chilling $64.5 billion, roughly 4 times Nicaragua's annual GDP. This was not just another infrastructure project, this is a geopolitical statement. With its proposed massive lock chambers and depths designed to handle the largest container ships and oil tankers on Earth, it had the potential to reshape global shipping lanes, turning Nicaragua into a new maritime kingmaker and dethroning Panama after a century of dominance. But from the beginning, the ambition reeked of volatility. The project was spearheaded by the enigmatic Chinese billionaire Wang Jing, a telecom tycoon with murky ties to Beijing's Belt and Road Initiative. His company, HKND Group, was granted a eye-widening 50-year concession to build and operate the canal, essentially giving him sovereign-like control over a strip of Nicaraguan territory. In return, Nicaragua's government, under President Daniel Ortega, promised economic salvation to its people, tens of thousands of jobs, booming ports, free trade zones, and global respect. Billboards and government propaganda sold the canal as the country's leap into the future. For a moment, it felt real. But almost immediately, the dream began to crack. Environmentalists sounded deafening alarms. The proposed route threatened pristine rainforests, protected reserves, and indigenous lands. Lake Nicaragua, a vital source of drinking water and biodiversity, would be dredged, polluted, and possibly salinized by ocean water. One US environmental watchdog called it one of the most ecologically destructive megaprojects ever conceived. Hydrologists warned that earthquakes, volcanic activity, and hurricanes, all common in the region, could destroy parts of the canal mid-construction or worse, post-completion. The project wasn't just risky, it was potentially catastrophic. Tens of thousands of Nicaraguans, many from indigenous and rural communities, faced displacement. Farmlands and ancestral homes were seized or marked for demolition. Protests erupted across the countryside, but dissent was met with silence, censorship, or outright repression. In secretive fashion, the contract between Nicaragua and HKND was never made fully public, leading many to question what exactly had been promised and what had been sold. And then, the ultimate twist. Recently, Wang Jing's financial empire began to crumble. The Chinese stock market crashed, and so far his net worth repeatedly plummeted by 85%. Funding for the canal dried up overnight, construction sites were abandoned, engineers left, the company's website went dormant. And just like that, a $64.5 billion dream faded into jungle silence. Today, there is no canal, just faded maps, abandoned bulldozers, and the lingering trauma of a country caught in the crossfire between ambition and reality. But here's the thing, the deal is still technically on the books. Nicaragua has not revoked the concession. Theoretically, if a new investor emerges, or if China's global ambitions swing back towards Central America, this leviathan of a project could still be resurrected. And if it ever does, game over. Panama's grip on maritime trade could collapse, the geopolitical balance in the Americas could shift overnight, and Nicaragua, once the poorest nation in Central America, could suddenly become its most powerful. For now though, the mega canal stands as a ghost project, a colossal what if carved into the landscape of history. But history has a funny way of repeating itself. And in the high-stakes game of global shipping and shadowy diplomacy, sometimes the most outrageous dreams are just waiting for the right moment to rise. Despite the chaos, the Panama Canal Authority is refusing to go down with the tide. While water levels have hit historic lows and daily ship transits are being squeezed like never before, Panama is scraping and clawing to stay relevant in the most cutthroat moment global trade has seen in decades. In the short term, they've slashed the number of ship slots from 36 per day down to as few as 22. It's a painful move, but a calculated one. A new booking system has been rolled out to manage demand, prioritize higher paying clients, and prevent total gridlock. And behind the scenes, they've quietly overhauled how the canal's massive locks use water. The tweaks may seem small on paper, but collectively, they made the canal's lock operations up to 7% more water efficient, a crucial gain when every drop matters. But here's where it gets interesting. Panama isn't just betting on the canal anymore. They're actively testing a land-based land bridge system, moving containers by rail and truck across the Isthmus of Panama. The goal? To create a stopgap solution for cargo when water levels are too low to float full-size ships through the locks. It's a bold pivot blending 20th century infrastructure with 21st century logistics. If it works, Panama could become a hybrid transit hub, both a canal and a land corridor, and in the long term, the stakes get even higher. Plans are already underway for a 1.6 billion reservoir sourced from the nearby Indio River. The project is nothing short of massive, essentially creating a backup water supply large enough to stabilize canal operations through drought years. If completed on schedule by 2030, it could restore daily ship transits to pre-crisis levels, even during dry seasons. The new reservoir would be one of the largest public infrastructure undertaking in Panama's modern history, designed not only to quench the canal's thirst, but to future-proof it in the face of climate volatility. And here's the kicker, financially, the canal remains a beast. In 2024 alone, it pulled in $4.99 billion in revenue despite the drought and operational cuts. Even more shocking, profits rose 8%, thanks in part to premium toll pricing and strategic ship prioritization. The golden goose? Still laying golden eggs, at least for now. But as other contenders emerge, Panama knows it's fighting to keep its crown. Because while the world still relies on this narrow stretch of water for nearly $270 billion worth of cargo each year, the winds are shifting, and Panama is in the eye of the storm. Could the race to find alternatives to the Panama Canal lead to a new era in global trade, or will the canal's challenges be resolved before these projects come to fruition? Share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching this video with us, and catch you in the next one.